The tears stung Penelope Hayes' eyes as she watched the last passenger board the train, leaving her alone on the wooden platform of Silver Creek Station, with nothing but a trunk of wedding clothes and a crushed bouquet of wilting wildflowers. The September sun of 1875 beat down mercilessly on her ivory wedding dress, now wrinkled and stained from the hours she'd spent waiting for a groom who never appeared. "Last call for Denver," the conductor shouted, eyeing her with a mixture of pity and impatience. Penelope shook her head, clutching the telegram in her trembling hand. Samuel Taylor, her fiancé of 2 years, had sent it just this morning. "Cannot marry, found another, do not come to Silver Creek." But it had arrived too late. She'd already made the journey from Boston, already stood waiting at the altar of the small-town church, already endured the whispers and stares of the locals as the minutes ticked by and no groom appeared. The train whistle blew, steam billowing around the platform as the engine began to pull away. With it went her last chance of returning east with some semblance of dignity. Her parents had scraped together every penny for her journey west to marry Samuel, the promising young businessman who traveled ahead to establish their new life. Now she had nowhere to go, no money for a return ticket, and not a single soul who cared what became of her. A cloud of dust rose in the distance, catching Penelope's attention as she dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The rhythmic pounding of hooves grew louder, and soon a rider appeared on the dirt road leading to the station. He rode tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. As he approached, Penelope could make out more details: a weathered brown Stetson pulled low over his eyes, a dust-covered denim shirt, and worn leather chaps. His bay stallion slowed from a gallop to a trot as they neared the platform. The stranger reined his horse to a stop beside her. For a long moment, he simply studied her, taking in the wedding dress, the trunk, and her tear-stained face. His own face was tanned and lined from years under the harsh western sun, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble. He couldn't have been more than 30, but his eyes held the wisdom of a man who had seen far more of life than his years suggested. "You must be Miss Hayes," he said finally, his voice deep and rough like gravel. Penelope stiffened. "How do you know my name? Word travels fast in Silver Creek." He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair streaked with hints of copper. "Wyatt Daniels. I ranch about 10 miles north of town." "I'm sorry, Mr. Daniels, but I don't see how that concerns me." Penelope straightened her spine, attempting to maintain what little dignity she had left. Wyatt regarded her carefully. "Samuel Taylor works for me, or worked, I should say. He cleared out his quarters this morning, took his wages, and lit out for California with the blacksmith's daughter." His mouth set in a grim line. "I didn't know he'd left a bride stranded until I came to town for supplies an hour ago." Fresh tears welled in Penelope's eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. The humiliation of being abandoned was bad enough without confirming the whole town knew her shame. "So you've come to gawk at the spectacle?" she asked bitterly. "No, madam." Wyatt replaced his hat and stepped closer. "I've come because no decent man would leave a woman stranded like this. You need somewhere to stay while you figure out your next step." He gestured toward the silent telegraph office and the darkening storefronts of Silver Creek. Towns mostly shut down for the night, hotels full with the cattle buyers in from Denver. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've got a spare room at my ranch house. It's clean, it's safe, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Rivera, will be there to ensure everything's proper." Penelope laughed without humor. "You want me to go home with a complete stranger after what just happened?" "You're coming home with me," Wyatt said, not as a question but as a simple statement of fact. Unless you'd prefer to spend the night on this platform. Your choice, Miss Hayes, but there's not many options in Silver Creek for a woman alone at sundown. She glanced around at the empty station, the rapidly darkening sky, and the few distant lights of a town she didn't know. The station master had already locked up and departed, leaving her truly alone. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Wyatt's expression softened slightly. "You don't, but I give you my word as a Daniels that you'll come to no harm under my roof." He held out a calloused hand. "One night. Tomorrow, if you want, I'll bring you back to town and you can sort out whatever you need to do next." Penelope hesitated, studying his face for any sign of deception. She found none, only a straightforward honesty that was as unfamiliar as it was compelling after Samuel's empty promises. "One night," she agreed finally, placing her gloved hand in his. Wyatt nodded once, then turned to her trunk. "This all you've got?" "Yes. Everything I own is in there." With seemingly effortless strength, he hoisted the heavy trunk and secured it to his horse. Then he turned back to her, eyes taking in her elaborate wedding dress with its layers of petticoats and delicate lace. "That's going to be difficult to ride in," he observed. Penelope looked down at her attire, suddenly aware of how impractical it was. "I don't have anything else to change into. My clothes are all packed." Wyatt considered this for a moment, then shrugged out of his long canvas duster coat. "Put this on over your dress. It'll keep you warm once the sun sets anyway." He handed it to her, then cupped his hands to give her a boost up to his horse. Penelope slipped the coat on, immediately enveloped in its warmth and the scent of leather, horse, and something distinctly masculine. She placed her foot in Wyatt's interlaced fingers and found herself lifted effortlessly onto the saddle. Wyatt mounted behind her in one smooth motion. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a secure circle that somehow made her feel safer than she had any right to feel with a stranger. "Hold on," he instructed. And then they were moving, the horse's steady gait carrying them away from the station and the shattered remains of the future she'd planned. As they rode through the main street of Silver Creek, Penelope kept her head down, avoiding the curious stares of the few townspeople still out at dusk. She was acutely aware of Wyatt's solid presence behind her, of the strength in the arms that held the reins on either side of her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked when they had left the town behind and were traveling through open country bathed in the golden light of sunset. Wyatt was quiet for so long that Penelope thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low near her ear. "I know what it's like to be stranded with nowhere to turn," he said simply. "And I know Taylor isn't worth the tears you've shed over him." They rode in silence after that, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them and the vast expanse of prairie stretching out around them. Penelope watched as the sun sank behind distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "It's beautiful," she murmured, despite herself. "That it is," Wyatt agreed. "Different from Boston, I expect. Very different." She thought of the crowded streets and sooty buildings of her hometown. "I've never seen so much space. Takes some getting used to, but once it gets in your blood, you never want to leave." As darkness fell completely, Wyatt pointed ahead to where a cluster of lights glowed warmly in the distance. "That's the ranch. Not much further now." The ranch turned out to be considerably more than Penelope had expected. As they approached, she made out a substantial two-story house built of sturdy logs, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings and corrals spread out behind it, and in the distance, she could see the silhouettes of what must be bunkhouses where the ranch hands lived. A woman emerged onto the porch as they rode into the yard, holding a lantern high. "Mr. Daniels, we were starting to worry. she called, her voice carrying a slight Spanish accent. Had an unexpected errand, Mrs. Rivera, Wyatt replied, bringing the horse to a stop. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Penelope down. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride, and she swayed slightly as her feet touched the ground. Wyatt's hands stayed at her waist until she found her balance. "Mrs. Rivera," he said, turning to the housekeeper. "This is Miss Penelope Hayes. She'll be staying with us tonight." The older woman's eyes widened as she took in Penelope's appearance, the wedding dress visible beneath Wyatt's coat, her disheveled hair and tear-stained face. But to her credit, Mrs. Rivera's expression quickly shifted to one of warm welcome. "Of course, sir. I'll prepare the guest room right away." She came forward, taking Penelope's arm gently. "Come inside, Miss Hayes. You look like you could use a hot meal and some rest." Penelope glanced back at Wyatt, who was already lifting her trunk from his horse. "Go on," he said with a nod. "I'll bring this in and see to Thunderbolt. Mrs. Rivera will take good care of you." Allowing herself to be led inside, Penelope entered a home far more comfortable than she had anticipated finding in this remote part of Colorado territory. The main room was spacious, with polished wooden floors partially covered by colorful woven rugs. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with sturdy leather chairs and a sofa arranged before it. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over everything, and bookshelves lined another wall filled with volumes that suggested the owner was no uneducated cowhand. "This way, Mrs. Rivera directed, leading her up a staircase to the second floor. "The guest room has its own washing area. I'll bring up some hot water so you can freshen up before dinner." The guest room was simply but comfortably furnished with a large bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window looked out over the ranch, and Penelope could see the pinpricks of light from the bunkhouses in the distance. "Thank you," she said, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers after the day's heartbreak. Mrs. Rivera patted her arm. "You rest. I'll be back with water, and then dinner will be ready in an hour." Left alone, Penelope sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the full weight of the day to crash over her. Samuel was gone. Her dreams of marriage, of building a life in the West with the man she thought loved her, all of it shattered in a single day. And now she was in the home of a man she'd just met, with no clear idea of what tomorrow would bring. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Mrs. Rivera entered with a steaming pitcher of water and a stack of towels. "I thought you might like these as well," the housekeeper said, placing a neatly folded bundle on the bed. "Just some simple things that might be more comfortable than your current dress." Penelope unfolded the bundle to find a modest cotton nightgown and a simple blue dress. "These aren't mine. They belonged to Mr. Daniels' sister when she visited last summer," Mrs. Rivera explained. "She's about your size, I think. She won't mind you borrowing them." "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly, please," the housekeeper interrupted gently. "It would make things easier for you, and Mr. Daniels asked me to offer them." Penelope nodded, too exhausted to argue further. "Thank you." After Mrs. Rivera left, Penelope struggled out of her wedding dress, the irony of removing it in these circumstances not lost on her. The dress that should have been taken off in the privacy of a bridal suite, with the loving hands of a new husband, was instead discarded in a stranger's guest room, tears staining its bodice. She washed quickly, grateful to remove the dust of travel and the dried tears from her face. The borrowed nightgown fit reasonably well, and she laid out the blue dress for the morning. Her own clothes remained in the trunk, which someone, presumably Wyatt, had placed at the foot of the bed. When she made her way downstairs later, guided by the smell of cooking food, she found Wyatt standing by the fireplace, studying a map spread out on a large wooden desk. He had changed into a clean shirt and removed his hat, revealing the full extent of his thick, dark hair. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Feeling better?" he asked. "As well as can be expected," she replied truthfully. "Mr. Daniels, I can't thank you enough for your kindness today." He waved off her thanks. "Wyatt, and it's nothing anyone with decent upbringing wouldn't do." Mrs. Rivera appeared from the kitchen, carrying a large pot to the dining table. "Dinner is ready. I hope you like beef stew, Miss Hayes." The meal was simple but delicious, hearty stew with fresh baked bread and apple pie for dessert. Wyatt ate with the efficiency of a man who viewed food as necessary fuel rather than something to be lingered over, but his manners were impeccable. He asked Penelope a few polite questions about her journey west, but carefully avoided any mention of Samuel or the wedding that hadn't happened. As Mrs. Rivera cleared away the dishes, Wyatt leaned back in his chair. "You have family back east," Penelope nodded. "My parents and a younger sister in Boston." "Will you go back to them?" The question hung in the air between them. Penelope stared into her coffee cup, considering her options. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "The journey here took nearly all my family's savings. They sacrificed so much to give me this chance at a new life." Her voice caught. "I don't know if I can face returning as a failure." "Being abandoned doesn't make you a failure," Wyatt said firmly. "It makes Taylor a fool and a coward." Penelope looked up, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "You barely know me, Mr. Daniels." "Wyatt," he corrected again, "and I know enough. Taylor worked for me for 8 months. He talked about his Boston fiancé, often enough educated, cultured, from a good family. Said you were writing a book of poetry." Heat rushed to Penelope's cheeks. "It's just a small collection, nothing important." "Seems important enough to me. Not many would pursue such things." His eyes held genuine interest. "What will you do now?" "I have some money saved, not much, but perhaps enough for a stage ticket to Denver. I could seek employment there as a teacher or a governess." Wyatt nodded thoughtfully. "Denver's growing fast, decent place for a fresh start." He hesitated, then added, "Or you could stay in Silver Creek for a while. Town's getting big enough to need another teacher. Current one's expecting a baby and looking to retire." Penelope blinked in surprise. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Wyatt?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not exactly my decision to make, but I'm on the town council. I could put in a word if you're interested." "Why would you do that for me?" he shrugged, the movement drawing attention to his broad shoulders. "Like I said, town needs a teacher. You need a job. Seems simple enough." But nothing about this situation was simple, and they both knew it. Penelope recognized the lifeline he was extending, yet caution held her back. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "Thank you, Mrs." Rivera returned with fresh coffee, and the conversation shifted to safer topics: the history of the ranch, the approaching cattle drive season, the changes coming to Colorado now that it was pushing for statehood. Wyatt, though not talkative by nature, proved to be knowledgeable and articulate, confirming Penelope's initial impression that he was far more than just a simple rancher. When Penelope finally excused herself to retire for the night, exhaustion weighing heavily on her limbs, Wyatt walked her to the foot of the stairs. "Sleep well, Miss Hayes," he said. "Tomorrow's a new day." In the privacy of the guest room, Penelope stood by the window, looking out at the vast expanse of land now silvered by moonlight. New day or not, her heart still ached with the fresh wound of betrayal. Yet somehow, in the span of a few hours, a path forward had begun to materialize where before there had been only despair. She thought of Wyatt Daniels, the unexpected rescuer, who had appeared when she needed help most. There was something solid about him, an inherent trustworthiness that she had sensed immediately despite her circumstances. It was too soon to know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since reading Samuel's telegram, Penelope felt a small spark of hope that perhaps all was not lost. Morning came with the sound of activity men's voices calling to each other outside, the clatter of horses and equipment, a rooster crowing insistently. Penelope woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in the borrowed blue dress, which fit better than she'd expected. After pinning her hair in a simple style, she made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Rivera busy in the kitchen. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," the housekeeper greeted warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected to," Penelope admitted. "Is Mr. Daniels about?" "He's been up since before dawn. The men are moving cattle to the north pasture today." Mrs. Rivera set a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "He asked me to tell you he'd be back mid-morning to take you into town if that's what you decide." Penelope picked at her breakfast, considering her options. Return to Boston in disgrace, try her luck in Denver, or stay in Silver Creek, where at least one person had shown her kindness when she needed it most. After breakfast, she asked Mrs. Rivera for some paper and a pen, then sat at the desk in the main room to write to her parents. The letter was difficult, explaining Samuel's betrayal, assuring them she was safe, and expressing her uncertainty about her next steps. She had just finished when the front door opened and Wyatt entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. "Morning," he said, removing his hat. His hair was wind-blown, his face slightly flushed from exertion. "Hope you slept all right." "I did, thank you." Penelope folded her letter carefully. "Mrs. Rivera said you'd be willing to take me to town." Wyatt nodded, those keen eyes of his taking in her appearance in the borrowed dress. "If that's what you want. Stage for Denver leaves at noon." There was something in his tone, not quite a question, but not quite a statement either. Penelope found herself hesitating. "Actually," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about what you said last night. About the teaching position in Silver Creek." His expression remained neutral, but she caught a flicker of something in his eyes. "And I'd like to inquire about it, if I may, before deciding whether to leave." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. I'll introduce you to Mayor Wilson while we're in town." He glanced at the letter in her hands. "Need to post that, please. We'll leave in 20 minutes if that suits you." The ride into Silver Creek was less awkward than Penelope had feared it might be. Wyatt had brought a wagon rather than his horse, which made conversation easier as they sat side by side on the bench seat. He pointed out features of the landscape as they traveled the creek that gave the town its name, the mountain pass that led to Denver, the boundaries of his own property. "How long have you had the ranch?" Penelope asked, genuinely curious. "Going on 8 years now," Wyatt replied. "Came out from Pennsylvania after the war with whatever I could carry and worked other men's cattle until I saved enough to buy my own land." "The war?" Penelope ventured cautiously. "You fought," a shadow crossed his face. "Union cavalry, 4 years." She nodded, sensing he didn't wish to elaborate. Many men who had survived the terrible conflict preferred not to speak of it. "And your family?" she asked instead. Mrs. Rivera mentioned a sister, Winifred. "She's married to a banker in St. Louis, visits once a year or so." A faint smile softened his features. "Always trying to convince me to move east, get civilized as she puts it. But you prefer it here." He gestured to the expansive landscape around them, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the sky an endless blue vault overhead. "Out here, a man can breathe, can build something that's truly his own." There was passion in his voice, and Penelope found herself smiling in response. I think I can understand that appeal. Wyatt glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. Most Eastern ladies I've met can't wait to get back to their comforts. Perhaps I'm not most Eastern ladies, she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper before he turned his attention back to the road. Perhaps you're not, he agreed quietly. Silver Creek by daylight was a more substantial town than Penelope had realized during her brief glimpse the previous evening. The main street boasted a hotel, a general store, a bank, and various other businesses, while side streets revealed neat rows of houses and a white steepled church. People moved about with purpose, nodding respectfully to Wyatt as he drove the wagon through town. They stopped first at the post office, where Penelope mailed her letter. Then, Wyatt led her to a small building with a brass plaque identifying it as the mayor's office. Mayor Wilson proved to be a portly, enthusiastic man with a luxuriant mustache and a booming voice. When Wyatt introduced Penelope and mentioned her background and interest in the teaching position, the mayor's face lit up. "Miss Hayes, what a fortunate turn of events," he exclaimed. "Our schoolmistress, Mrs. Henderson, is most eager to retire before her confinement." "Might you be available to begin immediately?" Penelope blinked, caught off guard by the rapid turn of events. I would need to find lodgings first. And oh, that's no trouble at all," Mayor Wilson interrupted. "The schoolhouse has living quarters attached, small but comfortable. Part of the compensation package, you understand, along with a monthly salary of $40. It was a modest sum, but more than Penelope had expected, and the inclusion of housing made it an even more attractive offer. "May I see the schoolhouse?" she asked. Of course. "I'll take you there directly." The mayor grabbed his hat. "Daniels, you'll join us." Wyatt, who had been standing quietly by the door, nodded. "If Miss Hayes doesn't mind." "Not at all," Penelope replied, finding she genuinely wanted his opinion. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple but well-maintained wooden building with large windows and a small bell tower. Inside, rows of desks faced a teacher's desk and blackboard. A door at the rear led to the attached living quarters, indeed small but clean and functional, with a bedroom, a sitting room with a small stove, and basic furnishings. "Mrs. Henderson will be relieved to know we've found someone," Mayor Wilson said as Penelope examined the space. "Term started 2 weeks ago and she's been struggling with her condition. 28 pupils at present, ages 6 to 16. "It seems very suitable," Penelope said, trying to contain her growing excitement. Teaching had always been her passion, though her parents had hoped for a more advantageous marriage rather than a career. "If you're certain I'm qualified, Daniels vouches for you, and that's good enough for me," the mayor declared. "Besides, you're clearly educated, well-spoken, and we're not exactly overwhelmed with candidates out here." Wyatt, who had been quietly observing, caught Penelope's eye. "It's your decision," he said, "but for what it's worth, I think you do well here." Something about his quiet confidence in her, a man who barely knew her, strengthened Penelope's resolve. "Then I accept," she said firmly. "When may I begin?" Mayor Wilson beamed. "Splendid. I'll inform Mrs. Henderson today. You can move in tomorrow and start teaching Monday morning." He pumped her hand enthusiastically. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Hayes." After the mayor departed, Penelope stood in what would soon be her new home, trying to absorb the swift change in her circumstances. Just 24 hours ago, she had been an abandoned bride with nowhere to turn. Now she was the new schoolteacher of Silver Creek. "It happened so fast," she murmured, half to herself. Having second thoughts, Wyatt asked, standing in the doorway. She turned to face him. "No, just adjusting." "Everything I planned, Everything I expected my life to be, it's all changed in an instant. Change can be good. He stepped further into the room. For what it's worth, I think you'll make a fine teacher. The children here need someone who'll take the job seriously. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, and thank you for everything else if you hadn't come to the station yesterday. But I did, he said simply. No use dwelling on what might have been. A practical philosophy, Penelope thought, and one she would do well to adopt herself. You're right. Looking forward is better than looking back. Wyatt nodded, seeming pleased by her response. Let me help you get settled. You'll need supplies, furnishings. Your trunk is still at my ranch. Oh, I couldn't impose further. It's no imposition, he cut in. Besides, I'm on the school board. Making sure our teacher is properly equipped is part of my responsibility. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Wyatt took Penelope to the general store, where he introduced her to the proprietor, Mr. Patterson, and his wife. Word of her arrival and new position spread quickly, and soon other townspeople were stopping by to meet her. If anyone knew the circumstances of her arrival in Silver Creek, they were kind enough not to mention it. By late afternoon, Penelope had acquired the basic necessities for her new home: linens, cookware, foodstuffs, and a few personal items. Wyatt insisted on paying for everything, brushing aside her protests. Consider it an advance on your first month's salary, he said. Town council approves it. As they loaded the purchases into the wagon, Penelope caught sight of a young woman across the street, watching them intently. The woman, scarcely more than a girl, really had striking red hair and was dressed more elaborately than most of the local women Penelope had met. Who is that? She asked Wyatt quietly. He glanced over, his expression hardening slightly. Violet Madsen, blacksmith's daughter, the girl who had run off with Samuel. Penelope felt a curious lack of anger as she studied the young woman. Instead, she felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. If Samuel could abandon one fiancé so easily, what loyalty could this girl expect from him? Wyatt seemed to read her thoughts. Taylor left her behind too, he said in a low voice. Took off with whatever money they could scrape together and didn't look back. She found out this morning. Penelope's heart sank. How old is she? 19. Been turning heads in this town since she was 16. Wyatt's tone was neutral, but Penelope detected disapproval beneath it. Let's finish up here and head back to the ranch. You can collect your things and spend one more night there before moving in tomorrow. The ride back was quieter, both of them occupied with their thoughts. Penelope found herself studying Wyatt's profile as he drove, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he concentrated on the road. There was something undeniably attractive about him, she admitted to herself, beyond his handsome features. A steadiness, a sense of purpose that Samuel had always lacked. At the ranch, Mrs. Rivera greeted the news of Penelope's appointment with genuine pleasure. Silver Creek is fortunate to have you, Miss Hayes, she said warmly. The children need a good education if they are to make something of themselves out here. Dinner that evening was a more relaxed affair than the previous night. Wyatt, seemingly more comfortable in Penelope's presence now, asked thoughtful questions about her education and teaching experience. She found herself speaking more freely than she had in months, sharing her passion for literature and her belief in education as a path to opportunity. You sound like my father, Wyatt remarked. He was a school teacher back in Pennsylvania. Always said education was the great equalizer. You never mentioned that, Penelope said, surprised. A shadow crossed his face. He died at Gettysburg, Confederate sharpshooter. I'm so sorry. Penelope's hand moved instinctively toward his on the table, though she stopped herself before making contact. Wyatt nodded acknowledgement of her sympathy. He's the reason I donate books to the school library every year. Seems fitting. The revelation of this connection between them, this shared value of education, shifted something in Penelope's perception of him. The rugged rancher had depth she was only beginning to glimpse. After dinner, they sat by the fire while Mrs. Rivera cleared away the dishes. Wyatt produced a chess set, eyebrows raised in question. "You play?" Penelope smiled. "My father taught me, though I warn you I'm rather good." His answering smile, the first true smile she'd seen from him, transformed his face entirely, softening the hard lines and lighting his eyes. "We'll see about that." They played 2 games, each winning one, before Penelope reluctantly acknowledged the lateness of the hour. As she prepared to retire, Wyatt walked her to the stairs as he had the night before. "Thank you for everything today," she said. "I feel hopeful for the first time since arriving in Colorado." "You should be," he replied. "You're starting fresh on your own terms. That takes courage." "I don't feel particularly courageous," she admitted. "The bravest people rarely do." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be in town often if you need anything. My offer of help doesn't end tomorrow." The sincerity in his voice warmed her. "That's good to know." "Good night, Penelope," he said, using her given name for the first time. "Good night, Wyatt." As she climbed the stairs, Penelope was acutely aware of his eyes following her progress. The sensation wasn't unpleasant. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Penelope packed her belongings, including the blue dress which Mrs. Rivera insisted she keep. "Consider it a welcome gift," the housekeeper said firmly. Wyatt was waiting with the wagon when she came downstairs. He loaded her trunk and the supplies they'd purchased the day before, then helped her up to the seat beside him. The drive to town seemed shorter this time, filled with comfortable conversation about the school and the community Penelope was joining. As they approached her new home, she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement building within her. "You'll do fine," Wyatt said, as if reading her thoughts. "These are good people. Give them a chance and they'll give you one too." He helped her carry everything inside, then stood somewhat awkwardly in the center of her small sitting room. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose you'll want to get settled in. Mrs. Henderson will be by this afternoon to go over the student roster and curriculum." Penelope nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Yes, I should unpack. I'll be bringing some cattle to the stockyards on Tuesday," he said. "Could stop by, see how you're getting on with the students." "I'd like that," she replied, perhaps too quickly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Until Tuesday, then." After he left, Penelope stood for a long moment in the center of her new home, taking stock of her situation. 4 days ago, she had been traveling west to marry a man she thought she loved. Now she was standing in her own home, about to begin a career as a teacher in a frontier town. It wasn't the life she had planned. But as she began unpacking her trunk, arranging her few possessions in this new space, Penelope realized it might just be the life she was meant to have all along. Monday morning arrived with a flutter of nerves in Penelope's stomach. She dressed with care in her most practical dress, arranged her hair in a simple but neat style, and tried to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel as she walked into the schoolroom to meet her pupils for the first time. 28 curious faces turned toward her as she entered, children ranging from tiny first years to lanky teenagers on the cusp of adulthood. She took a deep breath and smiled. "Good morning. I'm Miss Hayes, your new teacher." For a moment there was silence. Then a small girl in the front row raised her hand. "Yes," Penelope acknowledged her. "Are you really from Boston?" the child asked. "Billy says you talk funny 'cause you're from back east." A ripple of giggles spread through the classroom. Penelope's smile widened genuinely. "I am from Boston," she confirmed. "And perhaps my accent sounds different to your ears. just as your Western way of speaking sounds different to mine. That's one of the wonderful things about our country. We're all Americans, but we come from different places with different customs and ways of speaking. She moved to the blackboard and picked up a piece of chalk. In fact, let's make that our first lesson today. I'd like each of you to tell me your name and one interesting fact about where your family comes from. The ice broken. The day progressed better than Penelope could have hoped. The children were bright and eager, if somewhat behind in their studies compared to what she was accustomed to in Boston schools. By the end of the day, she had a clear sense of their abilities and needs, and was already forming plans for how to structure their learning in the coming weeks. As the last student filed out, Penelope sank into her chair with a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. She had done it, completed her first day as the teacher of Silver Creek School. A soft knock at the open door roused her. Looking up, she was surprised to see Violet Madsen standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Miss Hayes," the girl said uncertainly. "May I speak with you?" Penelope straightened, wary but determined to be kind. "Of course, Miss Madsen, please come in." Violet entered slowly, her hands twisting nervously in her skirt. Up close, she was even prettier than Penelope had thought, with delicate features and striking green eyes. But those eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and there was a vulnerability in her expression that immediately softened Penelope's heart. "I came to apologize," Violet blurted out. "For Samuel, for what he did to you. I didn't know he was engaged when we started, She trailed off, blushing deeply. "Please sit down," Penelope said gently, gesturing to one of the student desks. "And there's no need to apologize. From what I understand, Samuel deceived both of us." Violet sank into the offered seat, looking relieved but still miserable. "He told me he loved me, said we'd go to California together and get married." Her voice broke. "But he left without me, took my savings and just left. I'm very sorry," Penelope said, and meant it. Whatever hurt she had felt at Samuel's betrayal, at least she had been spared the humiliation of being abandoned in a town where everyone knew her. "Have you lived in Silver Creek long?" Violet nodded. "All my life. My pa's the blacksmith." "Everyone knows what happened now, and they all look at me like." She shook her head, tears welling again. "People will talk for a while, then they'll find something else to gossip about," Penelope said firmly. "In the meantime, you hold your head up. You weren't the one who broke promises and stole money." The younger woman looked up, surprise evident in her tear-stained face. "You're being kind to me." "Why?" Penelope considered the question. "Because being angry with you won't change what happened. And because I think Samuel Taylor has caused enough pain already without me adding to it." Violet wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. "You're not at all what I expected." "Nor is my life," Penelope replied with a wry smile. "But we make the best of what comes our way, don't we?" After Violet left, Penelope sat for a long time at her desk, thinking about forgiveness and fresh starts. There was something liberating about releasing her anger toward Samuel and the girl he had used to betray her. It felt like setting down a heavy burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. The next day of teaching went even more smoothly than the first. The children, sensing her genuine interest in their progress, responded with increasing enthusiasm. When the school day ended, Penelope found herself looking expectantly toward the door, remembering Wyatt's promise to stop by. Sure enough, as she was tidying the classroom, his tall figure appeared in the doorway. "Miss Hayes," he greeted her, hat in hand. "How goes the teaching?" Penelope couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "Very well, actually. The children are bright and eager to learn." Wyatt nodded, seeming pleased. "They're good kids, most of them, just need the right guidance." He glanced around the classroom. "Looks like you're settling in." "I am." She put down the books she'd been organizing. "How was your business at the stockyards?" "Profitable," he replied with a slight smile. "Beef prices are up this season." There was a moment of somewhat awkward silence before Wyatt spoke again. "Some of us are having dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight. Mayor Wilson, the doctor and his wife, a few others. They asked me to invite you to join us, help you get acquainted with the town." "That sounds lovely," Penelope said, genuinely pleased at the invitation. "What time should I be there?" "6 o'clock. I could escort you if you'd like." The offer sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Yes, thank you. That would be very kind." He nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll call for you at 5:45 then." After he left, Penelope hurried to her quarters to assess her wardrobe options. The blue dress she had worn to dinner at Wyatt's ranch seemed her best choice for the evening. As she prepared for the dinner, she found herself taking more care with her appearance than was strictly necessary for a simple community gathering. When Wyatt arrived to escort her, he too had clearly made an effort. His usual working clothes had been replaced by a crisp white shirt, dark waistcoat, and what appeared to be newly polished boots. His hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his stubble to a more manageable level. "You look very nice," he said as she joined him on the schoolhouse steps. "As do you," she replied, accepting his offered arm. "Is this a special occasion?" "Just the town's way of welcoming you properly," he said as they walked toward the hotel. "People here are curious about their new school teacher." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Silver Creek, though it would have been considered modest by Boston standards. Tonight it was busy with what appeared to be the leading citizens of the town, all of whom turned to watch as Wyatt escorted Penelope to a large table where Mayor Wilson was holding court. "Miss Hayes," the mayor boomed, rising to greet her. "Come, come. We've been eager to make your acquaintance properly." Introductions followed Dr. and Mrs. Fletcher, Mr. Patterson from the general store and his wife, the banker Mr. Simmons, and several other prominent townspeople. Penelope found herself seated between Wyatt and Mrs. Fletcher, a kindly woman in her 50s who immediately began filling her in on the town's history and inhabitants. "How are you finding the children?" Mrs. Fletcher asked as their meals were served. "My grandson William is in your class, the 10-year-old with the unfortunate cowlick." "William is very bright," Penelope said truthfully, "especially in mathematics. All the children have been welcoming and eager to learn." "They needed a proper teacher," Mr. Simmons observed from across the table. "Mrs. Henderson did her best, but her heart wasn't in it these past few years." The conversation flowed easily, with Penelope answering questions about her background and education while learning more about Silver Creek and its community. She was aware of Wyatt beside her, speaking little but observing everything with those keen eyes of his. Occasionally his arm or shoulder would brush against hers, sending an inexplicable warmth through her. "Miss Hayes has some interesting ideas for expanding our school curriculum," Wyatt said during a lull in the conversation. "Tell them about your plans for a natural history component, Penelope." Surprised and pleased that he had remembered their conversation on the subject, Penelope outlined her thoughts on incorporating the study of local flora, fauna, and geology into the children's lessons. "The West offers unique educational opportunities that Eastern schools can't provide," she explained. "I'd like the children to appreciate the natural world around them while learning scientific principles." Her ideas were met with enthusiasm, particularly from Dr. Fletcher, who offered to give occasional lectures on regional medicinal plants. By the time dessert was served, Penelope found herself at the center of plans for expanded community involvement in the school. "Seems you've won them over," Wyatt murmured as the group broke into smaller conversations. "They're very welcoming," she replied. "I wasn't expecting such support." "People here value education," he said. "And they're impressed by you, by me?" she asked, surprised. His eyes met hers, serious and direct. "You faced a difficult situation with grace and courage. That means something in a place like this, where life isn't always easy." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saying that and for everything else you've done." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability quickly masked. "It's nothing," he said, looking away, but they both knew it wasn't nothing. In the span of a few days, Wyatt Daniels had transformed from stranger to what? Friend, certainly. Benefactor, perhaps. But there was something else developing between them, something Penelope wasn't quite ready to name. As the evening drew to a close, Wyatt escorted her back to the schoolhouse. The night was clear, stars spread in a breathtaking canopy overhead, the air cool but not cold. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached her door. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Penelope said, turning to face him. "I enjoyed meeting everyone." "They enjoyed meeting you too," he replied. In the moonlight, his features were softer, the usual reserve in his expression less pronounced. "I should let you rest. School tomorrow." She nodded, but neither of them moved. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Wyatt cleared his throat. "Good night, Penelope." "Good night, Wyatt." He waited until she was safely inside before departing, his footsteps fading into the quiet night. Penelope leaned against the closed door, her heart beating a rapid rhythm that had nothing to do with the walk home. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant pattern. Penelope threw herself into teaching, finding genuine fulfillment in the progress of her students. The townspeople continued to welcome her, including her in social gatherings and community events. She found friends among the other women of Silver Creek, particularly Mrs. Fletcher, who took a motherly interest in her welfare. And then there was Wyatt. Though his ranch kept him busy, he made a point of coming to town at least twice a week. Sometimes he would stop by the schoolhouse at the end of the day. Other times, he would appear at community gatherings, inevitably finding his way to her side. They developed a comfortable companionship, discussing books, exchanging ideas about education, or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. Penelope found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and alarmed her. It was too soon, she told herself. Too soon after Samuel's betrayal to be developing feelings for another man. And yet, she couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened when Wyatt entered a room, or how his rare smiles sent warmth spreading through her chest. October brought cooler weather and the Harvest Festival, a major event in Silver Creek's calendar. The entire town gathered for games, food, music, and dancing in the town square. Penelope's students performed a series of recitations and songs she had helped them prepare, earning enthusiastic applause from the assembled townspeople. "You've done wonders with them," Wyatt said as he joined her after the performance. He was dressed more formally than usual in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. "Wilson says school attendance is up 20% since you arrived." Penelope smiled, pleased by the compliment. "The children are wonderful. I'm learning as much from them as they are from me." Music started up, fiddles, a guitar, and someone playing a piano that had been moved outside for the occasion. Couples began to form for dancing. "Would you care to dance, Miss Hayes?" Wyatt asked, offering his hand. Her heart skipped. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Daniels." His hand was warm and solid around hers as he led her to the dancing area. When he placed his other hand at her waist, Penelope felt a jolt of awareness run through her. They moved together easily, as if they had danced 100 times before. "You dance very well for a rancher," she observed, looking up at him. A hint of amusement touched his lips. "My mother insisted all her children learn proper social graces, said just because we lived in a small town didn't mean we had to act uncivilized. She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," he agreed, a flicker of old sorrow crossing his face. "She would have liked you." The simple statement carried a weight of meaning that made Penelope's breath catch. Before she could respond, the music changed to a livelier tune, and they were swept up in the more energetic steps required. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break for refreshments. As Wyatt went to fetch them drinks, Penelope found herself approached by Violet Madsen. "Miss Hayes," the younger woman greeted her with a shy smile. "Your students were wonderful today." "Thank you, Violet," Penelope replied warmly. In the weeks since their conversation at the schoolhouse, she had developed a cautious friendship with the blacksmith's daughter. "Are you enjoying the festival?" Violet nodded, glancing around the crowded square. "It's good to be out again. People are starting to talk to me normally." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I heard news of Samuel yesterday." Penelope stilled. "Oh, he's in San Francisco." "Working on the docks." Violet's expression was carefully neutral. "My cousin's husband saw him there. Said he looked different, thinner, working hard for little pay." Penelope absorbed this information, surprised to find she felt nothing beyond a detached curiosity. "I hope he finds what he's looking for," she said finally. Violet studied her face. "You really don't hate him, do you, or me?" "No," Penelope said truthfully. "I think perhaps he did me a favor in a strange way. If we had married, I might never have found." She trailed off, her eyes instinctively seeking Wyatt in the crowd. Violet followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "Mr. Daniels is a good man," she said quietly. "The whole town respects him. And he looks at you like—" She broke off as Wyatt returned, nodding politely to both women as he handed Penelope a cup of punch. After Violet departed, Wyatt raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Everything all right?" "Yes," Penelope replied, finding she meant it completely. "Everything is just fine." As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a warm glow over the continuing festivities. When the dancing resumed, Wyatt once again claimed Penelope as his partner. This time, as they moved together to a slower melody, he held her a fraction closer than before. "You've changed this town," he said quietly, his voice for her ears alone. "Brought something it was missing." Penelope looked up at him, struck by the intensity in his gaze. "I think it's the other way around. Silver Creek has changed me. For the better, definitely for the better." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I'm glad you stayed." The simple words held a depth of feeling that resonated through her. "So am I," she whispered. When the festival finally ended, Wyatt insisted on walking her home despite the lateness of the hour. The streets were quiet now, most townspeople having already retired. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden sidewalks as they walked side by side. Close but not touching at her door, Penelope turned to thank him for the evening. The words died on her lips as she saw the expression on his face, intent, questioning, with an underlying warmth that made her heart race. "Penelope," he said, his voice deeper than usual. "I find myself thinking about you, often." Her breath caught. "I think about you too." He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I know it hasn't been long since you came here, since Taylor." He trailed off, jaw tightening at the mention of Samuel. "That feels like a lifetime ago," she said truthfully. Wyatt's eyes searched hers as if looking for confirmation. Whatever he saw there seemed to decide him. Slowly, Giving her every opportunity to step away, he raised a hand to her cheek, his touch feather-light. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. In answer, Penelope leaned forward, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers gently at first, then with increasing certainty as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. Penelope's hands found their way to his shoulders, then to the nape of his neck where her fingers tangled in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you at the train station," he admitted. A laugh bubbled up from Penelope's chest. "Even when I was crying and bedraggled in a wedding dress meant for another man," his expression grew serious. "Especially then. You looked lost and hurt, but there was a strength in you. I could see it even then." She shook her head, wonderingly. "You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself." "I see you, Penelope Hayes." His hand cupped her cheek again. "And I'm falling in love with what I see." The word sent a thrill through her entire body. "Wyatt, you don't have to say anything now," he said quickly. "It's soon, I know that. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Penelope reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I've been fighting it, telling myself it's too soon, but it's happening all the same." The smile that transformed his face then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and full of promise. He kissed her again, more urgently this time, his arms tightening around her as if he never wanted to let go. When they finally parted, both were reluctant to end the evening. But propriety and the lateness of the hour eventually prevailed. "I should go," Wyatt said, though he made no move to release her. "People will talk if I stay any longer." "Let them talk," Penelope replied with uncharacteristic boldness, then laughed at his raised eyebrow. "But you're right, of course. I am the school teacher after all." He kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling. "I'll see you tomorrow. I'd like that." As she watched him walk away, Penelope touched her lips, still tingling from his kisses. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, she felt truly at home, not just in Silver Creek, but in her own skin, in the life she was building for herself. The weeks that followed were filled with a happiness Penelope had never experienced before. Her days were devoted to teaching, her evenings often spent with Wyatt. They were careful to maintain propriety in public. Silver Creek might be a frontier town, but certain standards were still expected, especially of the schoolteacher. But their growing relationship was hardly a secret. Penelope often caught knowing smiles from Mrs. Fletcher or other townspeople when Wyatt came to escort her to various community events. November brought colder weather and preparations for Thanksgiving. The school term was progressing well, with Penelope's students showing remarkable improvement in their studies. She found herself thriving in her role, developing innovative teaching methods that engaged even her most reluctant pupils. Wyatt, meanwhile, was busy with ranch work before winter set in fully. Despite his heavy workload, he made time to see Penelope several times a week. Sometimes they would simply walk together after school. Other times, he would bring her to dinner at the hotel restaurant. On Sundays, they attended church together, sitting side by side in a pew near the back, their shoulders touching just enough to send a pleasant warmth through Penelope's body. As Thanksgiving approached, Mrs. Fletcher organized a community dinner to be held at the town hall. "Everyone contributes a dish," she explained to Penelope. "It's a Silver Creek tradition." "I'm afraid my cooking skills are limited," Penelope admitted. "Boston ladies aren't typically trained in kitchen arts beyond the basics." Mrs. Fletcher patted her hand. "Not to worry, dear. Mrs. Rivera from the Daniels Ranch has offered to help you prepare something. said Wyatt suggested it. The thought of Wyatt considering her potential embarrassment and arranging a solution touched Penelope deeply. That weekend, she rode out to the ranch with Wyatt to spend the afternoon learning to make a proper apple pie under Mrs. Rivera's expert guidance. "Mr. Daniels says you're good with your hands," the housekeeper observed as Penelope carefully crimped the edges of the pie crust. "Says you have the patience for detail work." Penelope glanced at Wyatt, who was seated at the kitchen table, ostensibly reviewing ranch accounts but clearly listening to their conversation. "Does he now?" A faint flush colored Wyatt's cheeks, but he met her gaze steadily. "I've seen your handwriting on the blackboard," he said. "Very precise." Mrs. Rivera chuckled, moving to check the oven temperature. "Is that what you were admiring, Mr. Daniels, her handwriting?" This easy teasing, the warmth of the kitchen, the sense of belonging, it all washed over Penelope in a wave of contentment. This was what a home should feel like, she realized. Not the formal, restrained atmosphere of her parents' Boston house, but this: warmth, laughter, and the presence of people who genuinely cared for one another. Later, after the pie was baking and Mrs. Rivera had gone to attend to other duties, Wyatt led Penelope to the study where they had played chess on her second night at the ranch. The room was unchanged, bookshelves still lined the walls. The leather chairs still faced the fireplace where a fire now crackled merrily. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Wyatt said as they settled in the chairs. "The school term ends for Christmas break soon, doesn't it?" Penelope nodded. "December 18th is our last day. Classes resume January 3rd. You have plans for the holiday?" The question had been on her mind as well. Her parents had written, expressing their hope that she might return to Boston for Christmas, but the journey was expensive and time-consuming. And if she was honest with herself, the thought of leaving Silver Creek and Wyatt even temporarily held little appeal. "No definite plans," she replied. "My parents would like me to visit, but it's a long journey for such a short time." Wyatt nodded, seeming relieved. "In that case, I have a proposition for you." He leaned forward in his chair. "My sister Winifred and her husband are coming from St. Louis for Christmas. They arrive on the 20th and stay through New Year's. I'd like you to join us for the holiday here at the ranch." Penelope blinked in surprise. "You want me to stay here? For the entire break?" "Mrs. Rivera would be here the whole time, of course," he added quickly. "And Winifred and her husband. Everything completely proper. You'd have your own room, the same one you stayed in before." The invitation touched her deeply. "You want me to meet your sister?" "Yes." His expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. "She's my only family, and he paused, choosing his words carefully. "You're important to me, Penelope, very important." The significance of the invitation wasn't lost on her. Meeting his sister, spending the holiday with his family, it was a clear statement of his intentions toward her. "I'd be honored," she said softly. "Thank you, Wyatt." The smile that lit his face was worth any potential awkwardness the arrangement might entail. He reached across the space between their chairs to take her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "There's something else," he said, his voice lower now. "Something I've been wanting to ask you." Penelope's heart quickened. "Yes." But whatever Wyatt had been about to say was interrupted by the return of Mrs. Rivera, announcing that the pie was ready to come out of the oven. The moment passed, though the look in Wyatt's eyes promised that the conversation would be continued another time. Thanksgiving arrived with a light dusting of snow, the first of the season. The community dinner at the town hall was a lively affair, with seemingly the entire population of Silver Creek in attendance. Penelope's apple pie, displayed proudly alongside dozens of other dishes, received numerous compliments. "You're becoming quite the Western woman," Wyatt murmured in her ear as they watched Mayor Wilson carve an enormous turkey at the head table. Hardly, Penelope laughed. One pie doesn't make me a frontier cook. No, but you've adapted to everything else Silver Creek has thrown at you. His expression grew serious. Not everyone could have done that, you know. Most Eastern ladies would have been on the first stage back to civilization after what happened to you. She considered this. Perhaps I wasn't as suited to Boston life as I thought, or perhaps. She met his gaze directly. Perhaps I found something here worth staying for. The look he gave her then was so full of tenderness that Penelope felt it like a physical touch. They were interrupted by Mrs. Fletcher calling everyone to be seated for the meal, but the connection between them remained, a tangible thread binding them together even as they joined the larger community gathering. After Thanksgiving, the pace of life in Silver Creek seemed to accelerate as Christmas approached. The school was busy with end-of-term examinations and preparations for the Christmas pageant. Penelope found herself working long hours, often returning to her quarters after dark, too tired to do more than eat a simple meal before falling into bed. Wyatt, understanding her workload, adjusted his visits accordingly. Sometimes he would simply bring her dinner at the schoolhouse, sitting quietly grading papers while she worked late into the evening. Other times, he would insist on taking her for brief walks in the crisp winter air, claiming she needed fresh air and exercise to maintain her strength. "You're working too hard," he observed one evening as they strolled along Silver Creek's Main Street, now decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the holiday season. "The whole town's talking about how dedicated their new teacher is." Penelope smiled, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I want the children to be prepared, and the Christmas pageant is important to everyone." "Including you?" he asked perceptively. She nodded. "It's my first Christmas away from home. Making it special for the children helps me feel connected to the season, I suppose." Wyatt squeezed her hand where it rested in the crook of his arm. "I understand. Just don't wear yourself out before the holiday even arrives." His concern warmed her more effectively than her heavy wool coat. "I promise to pace myself." The night of the school Christmas pageant arrived with perfect winter weather, cold enough for a light snow to dust the ground, but clear enough for travel. The town church, where the performance was to be held, was packed with parents, siblings, and community members eager to see the children perform. Penelope watched from the side of the small stage as her students enacted the nativity story, recited Christmas poems, and sang carols she had taught them. Pride swelled in her chest as even the shyest children remembered their lines, and the most reluctant singers joined in the carols with enthusiasm. When the performance ended to enthusiastic applause, Mayor Wilson stepped forward to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that Silver Creek School has never presented a finer Christmas pageant." He waited for the renewed applause to die down. "And we have our new teacher, Miss Hayes, to thank for it. Miss Hayes, would you please come forward?" Blushing at the unexpected attention, Penelope stepped onto the stage. To her surprise, the mayor presented her with a small wrapped package. "A token of appreciation from the town council and all the parents," he explained, "for your dedication to our children." Touched beyond words, Penelope accepted the gift. Opening it, she found a beautiful silver brooch in the shape of an open book, with Silver Creek School engraved on its pages. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Teaching your children has been my privilege and joy." As she stepped down from the stage, her eyes sought and found Wyatt in the crowd. He was watching her with a mixture of pride and something deeper, more profound, that made her heart skip a beat. Later, as the crowd dispersed and parents collected their children, Wyatt made his way to her side. "You were right to be proud," he said quietly. "You've accomplished something remarkable here." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a stream of parents offering congratulations and thanks. By the time the last family had departed, Penelope was exhausted but elated. "Let me walk you home," Wyatt offered, taking her arm. The night was still and peaceful, the streets of Silver Creek transformed by moonlight on fresh snow. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the schoolhouse. "Would you like to come in for tea?" Penelope asked, suddenly reluctant to end the evening. Wyatt hesitated, then nodded. For a little while. Inside her small quarters, Penelope bustled about preparing tea while Wyatt built up the fire in her small stove. The domestic scene struck her with its rightness, the two of them moving around the small space together, anticipating each other's needs without words. When the tea was ready, they sat together on the small sofa, closer than propriety might strictly allow, but well within the bounds of the understanding that had developed between them. "I have something for you," Wyatt said after they had been sitting quietly for a time. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "But Christmas isn't for another week," Penelope protested. "This isn't a Christmas gift," he replied, an unusual nervousness in his manner. "It's something else entirely." Curious, Penelope untied the string and unwrapped the paper to reveal a small velvet box. Her heart began to pound as she opened it. Inside lay a ring, a delicate gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was elegant, understated, and utterly perfect. "Wyatt," she breathed, looking up to find his eyes fixed intently on her face. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, his voice low and serious. "Just a few months since you came to Silver Creek, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He took her hand in his. "I love you, Penelope Hayes. I want to build a life with you here if that's what you want, or anywhere else in the world if it isn't." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am." He took the box from her hands and removed the ring. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The question hung in the air between them, momentous and life-changing. Penelope thought of the day she had arrived in Silver Creek, heartbroken and abandoned. She thought of the man before her, now steady, honorable, and loving in a way Samuel Taylor could never have been. She thought of the life they might build together, based not on girlish fantasies but on genuine respect, shared values, and deep affection. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Wyatt, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was pulling her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that conveyed all the emotion words couldn't express. Penelope responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she surrendered to the happiness flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this," he said softly. "I'll spend every day making sure of it." Penelope touched his face gently. "I know I won't. You've already given me more happiness than I ever thought possible." They sat together late into the evening, making plans for their future. Wyatt wanted a spring wedding, after the worst of winter had passed, but before the busiest ranch season began. Penelope agreed, suggesting May when the wildflowers would be in bloom. "Will your parents come for the wedding?" Wyatt asked, his arm around her shoulders as they sat close together before the stove. Penelope nodded. "I'll write to them tomorrow. They'll be surprised, but I think they'll understand once they meet you." She looked down at the ring on her finger, still hardly believing it was real. "What about your sister? Will she approve?" "Winifred," Wyatt smiled. "She's been writing for years that I should find a wife. She'll be delighted, especially when she meets you at Christmas." The mention of Christmas reminded Penelope of the approaching holiday and her planned stay at the ranch. "Should we tell your sister when she arrives, or wait?" Wyatt considered this. "Let's wait a day or two, let her get to know you first, though I doubt I'll be able to hide how I feel about you." His expression grew more serious. "Are you sure about this, Penelope? About marrying a rancher, living out here away from the city and everything you're used to?" She turned to face him fully. "Wyatt Daniels, when you rode up to that train station and said you're coming home with me, you changed the course of my life. I didn't know it then, but that moment set me on a path I was always meant to follow." She took his hands in hers. "This is where I belong, with you, in this life we're building together." His answering smile was all the confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice. The last days of the school term passed in a blur of happiness for Penelope. Though she and Wyatt had agreed to keep their engagement private until after Christmas, she found it difficult to contain her joy. The ring remained in its box during school hours, worn only in the privacy of her quarters or during her evenings with Wyatt. On the last day of term, the children presented her with handmade cards and small gifts: a pinecone ornament, a hand-knitted scarf, a jar of preserved peaches. Penelope accepted each with genuine gratitude, touched by the affection her students had developed for her in just a few months. As the last child departed with wishes for a Merry Christmas, Penelope began packing the few things she would need for her stay at the ranch. Wyatt had arranged for Mrs. Rivera to come help her move her belongings the following morning. That evening, Penelope wrote a long letter to her parents, explaining her engagement and the happiness she had found in Silver Creek. She described Wyatt, his character, his ranch, his standing in the community, and expressed her hope that they would approve of her choice and attend the wedding in May. As she sealed the envelope, Penelope reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few months. The heartbreak that had seemed unbearable on that September day now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the joy she had found since. The next morning, Wyatt arrived with Mrs. Rivera and the wagon to transport Penelope to the ranch. The housekeeper chattered happily about preparations for Christmas and the arrival of Winifred and her husband, while Wyatt loaded Penelope's trunk and bags. "Ready?" he asked as he helped her up to the wagon seat. Penelope nodded, smiling at the double meaning in his question. "More than ready." The ranch looked different in winter, the pastures covered in a light blanket of snow, smoke rising from the chimneys of the main house and bunkhouses, evergreen wreaths adorning the doors. As they approached, Penelope felt a sense of homecoming that surprised her with its intensity. Mrs. Rivera bustled ahead to prepare Penelope's room while Wyatt carried her trunk inside. In the privacy of the entrance hall, he pulled her into a brief but fervent embrace. "Welcome home," he murmured against her hair. The words sent a thrill through her. Home. Yes, that was exactly what this place was becoming. The next 2 days were filled with preparations for Christmas and the arrival of Wyatt's sister. Penelope helped Mrs. Rivera bake cookies and pies, decorate the house with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and prepare the guest rooms. Wyatt was busy with ranch work, but joined them for meals and in the evenings, when they would sit by the fire, talking or reading companionably. On the afternoon of December 20th, the sound of an approaching carriage brought everyone to attention. Wyatt went out to meet it while Penelope and Mrs. Rivera waited in the entrance hall. "Nervous?" Mrs. Rivera asked, straightening Penelope's collar with motherly attention. "A little," Penelope admitted. "I want his sister to like me." The housekeeper smiled knowingly. "She will. Anyone can see how happy you make him." Before Penelope could respond, the front door opened and Wyatt entered, followed by a petite woman with the same dark hair and striking blue eyes as her brother. Behind her came a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples. "Penelope," Wyatt said, his voice warm with affection. "This is my sister, Winifred Barnes, and her husband, Philip. Winnie, Philip, Miss Penelope Hayes, Silver Creek schoolteacher." Winifred stepped forward immediately, taking both of Penelope's hands in hers. "Miss Hayes, what a pleasure to meet you at last. My brother's letters have been full of nothing but praise for Silver Creek's new teacher." Penelope felt herself blushing. "It's lovely to meet you too, Mrs. Barnes. Wyatt speaks of you often." "Winnie, please," the other woman insisted. "And this is Philip." Mr. Barnes shook Penelope's hand with a warm smile. "Delighted, Miss Hayes. I understand you're from Boston originally." The initial introductions complete, Mrs. Rivera directed the new arrivals to their rooms to refresh themselves after their journey. Wyatt hung back as the others went upstairs, giving Penelope a questioning look. "All right," he asked quietly. She nodded, smiling reassuringly. "Your sister seems wonderful." "She is," he agreed. "And she's going to love you." Dinner that evening was a lively affair. Winifred was as talkative as her brother was reserved, filling the conversation with stories of their childhood in Pennsylvania and updates on mutual acquaintances from back east. Philip, quieter but equally warm, occasionally interjected with gentle teasing or clarifications to his wife's more exuberant tales. Penelope found herself drawn into the family dynamic with surprising ease. Winifred asked thoughtful questions about her teaching and her adjustment to life in the West, while Philip engaged her in conversation about literature and the latest developments in education. "So tell me, Miss Hayes," Winifred said as Mrs. Rivera served dessert, "how is it that a refined Boston lady finds herself teaching school in a place like Silver Creek? Not that it isn't a lovely town," she added hastily, "but it's hardly Boston." Penelope hesitated, glancing at Wyatt. They had agreed to be honest about how they met, seeing no reason to hide a story that much of the town already knew. "I actually came to Silver Creek to be married," she said carefully. "But my fiancé changed his mind at the last moment." Winifred's eyes widened in shock. "How dreadful!" "The cad simply abandoned you." "I'm afraid so." Penelope kept her tone even, determined not to play the victim. "Wyatt happened to be at the train station when I found myself stranded. He kindly offered me shelter until I could determine my next steps." Winifred turned to her brother with newfound respect. "That was remarkably decent of you, Wyatt." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "I rather think not," Philip observed mildly. "And then you decided to stay in Silver Creek, Miss Hayes." Penelope nodded. "The teaching position became available, and I found I enjoyed the community. It's been a blessing in disguise, really." Winifred looked between Penelope and her brother, a speculative gleam in her eye. "Indeed, a blessing for Silver Creek to gain such a qualified teacher. And perhaps for others as well." Later, after Philip had retired and Mrs. Rivera had cleared away the last of the dishes, Winifred cornered her brother in the study while Penelope was upstairs preparing for bed. "She's lovely, Wyatt," she said without preamble. "Absolutely lovely." He smiled, unable to disagree. "She is, and you're in love with her." It wasn't a question. Wyatt met his sister's knowing gaze directly. "Yes," Winifred clapped her hands together in delight. "I knew it. I could see it in the way you look at her. Does she feel the same?" "I believe she does." He hesitated, then decided to trust his sister with the truth. "In fact, I've asked her to marry me and she's accepted." For a moment, Winifred was speechless, a rare occurrence. Then she flung her arms around her brother's neck. "Oh, Wyatt, I'm so happy for you. When did this happen?" "Just a few days ago," he admitted, returning her embrace. We were planning to tell you and Philip after Christmas, let you get to know her first. Winifred pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with emotion. No need to wait on my account. I can already see she's perfect for you. She squeezed his hands. Mother and father would be so pleased. The mention of their parents brought a momentary solemnity to the conversation. I think they would, Wyatt agreed quietly. She reminds me of Mother, sometimes her strength, her way with people. When will you marry? May, he replied. After the worst of winter but before the summer work begins in earnest. Winifred nodded approvingly. A spring wedding. Perfect. She hesitated, then asked more gently, Are you happy, Wyatt? Truly happy? He thought of Penelope, her intelligence, her courage, the way she had transformed his life in just a few months. Happier than I ever thought possible, he said honestly. His sister's eyes filled with tears. Then that's all that matters. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the ranch. After breakfast, Wyatt suggested a sleigh ride to show Philip and Winifred the property. Mrs. Rivera packed a basket with hot coffee and sandwiches, and the four of them set out in the large sleigh Wyatt used for winter travel. Bundled in blankets against the cold, Penelope sat beside Wyatt while he drove, with Winifred and Philip in the seat behind them. The runners of the sleigh cut smoothly through the fresh snow, the horses' breath forming clouds in the frigid air as they trotted along. Wyatt pointed out features of the ranch, the northern pastures where the cattle were wintered, the creek that gave the town its name, the stand of pines where he harvested Christmas trees. Penelope, having never seen the full extent of his property, was impressed by its size and beauty. It's magnificent, she said as they paused on a rise overlooking a snow-covered valley. You've built something remarkable here. We've only seen a fraction of it, Winifred called from behind them. The ranch extends all the way to those hills in the distance. Wyatt shrugged, but Penelope could see he was pleased by her admiration. There's still much to be done, he said. But yes, it's good land. As they continued their tour, Penelope found herself imagining a future here, springtime with wildflowers covering the meadows, summer with the land lush and green, autumn with the aspens turning gold. A future with Wyatt, building a life together on this land he loved so deeply. They stopped for their picnic in a sheltered grove of pines, spreading blankets on a fallen log to sit on while they ate. Though the air was cold, the sun shone brightly, making the snow sparkle like diamonds. I can see why you love it here, Philip remarked to Wyatt as they sipped hot coffee from tin cups. There's a peace to it that's hard to find in the city. I'm hoping Penelope feels the same, Wyatt replied, his gaze meeting hers. I do, she said without hesitation. It's become home to me in a way Boston never quite was. Winifred, who had been watching this exchange with evident delight, could contain herself no longer. Oh, for heaven's sake, you too. Are you going to announce your engagement, or must I do it for you? Penelope gasped in surprise while Wyatt turned to his sister with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. I see you can still keep a secret for all of 12 hours, Winnie. You told her, Penelope asked. Last night, he admitted. I hope you don't mind. Before she could respond, Winifred moved to sit beside her, taking her hands. My dear, I couldn't be happier. My brother deserves someone special, and it's clear to me that you are exactly that. Touched by the warmth of her acceptance, Penelope squeezed the other woman's hands. Thank you. That means a great deal to me. Philip offered his congratulations as well, raising his coffee cup in a toast. To new beginnings and happy futures. They drank to that, and then Wyatt reached into his coat pocket. Since the secret's out, he said, producing the small velvet box, perhaps you should be wearing this. He opened the box to reveal the pearl ring. Taking it out, he slipped it onto Penelope's finger in full view of his sister and brother-in-law. The gesture, so public and declarative, brought tears to Penelope's eyes. "It's beautiful," Winifred sighed, admiring the ring. "Simple but elegant, just perfect." Wyatt's eyes remained on Penelope's face. "Just like her," he said softly. The rest of the day passed in a glow of happiness. When they returned to the ranch, Mrs. Rivera was informed of the engagement and added her own enthusiastic congratulations. The evening was spent decorating the Christmas tree Wyatt had cut from his own land, hanging ornaments and stringing popcorn while Philip played carols on the piano in the corner of the main room. Later, as they prepared for the Christmas Eve service at the town church, Penelope found a moment alone with Wyatt in the study. "Are you sure you're ready for everyone to know?" she asked, touching the ring on her finger. "People will notice at the service tonight." He took her hands in his expression serious. "I'm more than ready. In fact, I'd shout it from the rooftops if that wouldn't scandalize the entire town." His eyes searched hers. "Unless you'd prefer to wait." "No," she said quickly. "I'm proud to be your fiancé, Wyatt. I just wanted to be sure you were ready for the attention it will bring." His answer was to draw her into his arms and kiss her thoroughly, propriety briefly forgotten in the privacy of the study. When they broke apart, both a little breathless, his smile held a hint of mischief she rarely saw. "Does that answer your question?" The Christmas Eve service was a community affair, with nearly every resident of Silver Creek in attendance. As Wyatt had predicted, Penelope's ring was noticed immediately, first by Mrs. Fletcher, who embraced her with genuine delight, and then by others as the news spread through the congregation. Mayor Wilson insisted on making an announcement before the service began, officially congratulating our esteemed schoolteacher and our most respected rancher on their engagement. The resulting applause was heartfelt and sustained, leaving Penelope blushing but deeply moved by the community's support. After the service, they were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and asking about wedding plans. Violet Madsen approached shyly, her eyes sincere as she wished them happiness. "You deserve it, Miss Hayes," she said quietly. "Both of you do." Christmas Day at the ranch was everything Penelope had hoped for and more. They exchanged gifts around the tree in the morning books from Philip and Winifred, a beautiful shawl from Mrs. Rivera, and from Wyatt, a delicate gold locket containing a small photograph of the two of them taken at the Harvest Festival. "So you'll always have me near your heart," he said as he fastened it around her neck. Penelope's gift to him was a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue that matched his eyes, and a rare first edition of Emerson's essays she had ordered from a bookseller in Denver. "How did you know Emerson was my favorite?" he asked, running his fingers reverently over the leather binding. "You quoted him the first time we played chess," she replied. "I noticed your collection was missing this volume." His kiss of thanks was brief but fervent, mindful of their audience but heartfelt nonetheless. Christmas dinner was a feast prepared jointly by Mrs. Rivera and Winifred, with Penelope assisting where she could. They ate in the formal dining room, which was used only for special occasions, with the table set with Mrs. Daniels' best china that Winifred had helped preserve over the years. As they enjoyed their meal, Penelope looked around at the faces of these people who were becoming her family. Wyatt, solid and steadfast beside her. Winifred, vibrant and warm across the table. Philip, thoughtful and kind at his wife's side. And Mrs. Rivera, who had made her feel welcome from the first day. This was home, she realized. Not a place, but these people, this feeling of belonging. "A penny for your thoughts," Wyatt murmured as the others engaged in conversation about the latest news from St. Louis. Penelope smiled, leaning slightly closer to him. I was just thinking how fortunate I am. A few months ago, I thought my life was ruined. Now I can't imagine being happier." His hand found hers under the table, their fingers intertwining. "I feel the same way. When I rode up to that train station, I had no idea my whole life was about to change." "For the better?" she asked, echoing his question from months before. His answering smile was all the response she needed. "Definitely for the better." The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a pleasant blur of family activities, preparations for the upcoming term at school, and quiet moments alone with Wyatt when they could find them. Winifred and Philip were delightful company, and Penelope found herself growing genuinely attached to Wyatt's sister, whose warmth and humor complemented her brother's more reserved nature. On New Year's Eve, the town of Silver Creek held a dance at the hotel. It was a festive affair, with the hotel dining room cleared for dancing and decorated with evergreens and paper lanterns. As the engaged couple, Penelope and Wyatt were the center of much attention, receiving congratulations from townspeople they hadn't seen since the announcement at Christmas Eve service. "You're quite the local celebrity," Wyatt observed as they took a brief respite from dancing. "The teacher who tamed the confirmed bachelor rancher," Penelope laughed. "Is that what they're saying, among other things?" His eyes held hers, warm with affection. "They're also saying I'm the luckiest man in Colorado territory." "And are you?" she teased. In answer, he led her to a quiet corner of the room, away from the crowd. "Penelope Hayes," he said softly, "when you agreed to marry me, you made me the happiest man not just in Colorado but anywhere on this earth. I wake up each morning thinking I must have dreamed you, and then I remember that you're real and that you've chosen to spend your life with me." Moved beyond words, Penelope reached up to touch his face. "Oh, Wyatt, I'm the fortunate one. When I think of how close I came to missing you, but you didn't," he interrupted gently. "You're here, I'm here, and in a few months you'll be my wife." He glanced toward the dance floor where couples were assembling for another set. "May I have this dance, future Mrs. Daniels?" The sound of her future name sent a thrill through Penelope. "You may indeed, Mr. Daniels." As they joined the other dancers, Penelope caught sight of the large clock on the wall, showing just a few minutes before midnight. Soon it would be 1876, a new year, full of promise and possibility. As Wyatt's arms encircled her for the dance, she felt a profound sense of rightness, of having found exactly where she belonged. The music played, the clock ticked toward midnight, and Penelope Hayes, once abandoned and heartbroken, now cherished and whole, danced in the arms of the man who had changed her life with 7 simple words spoken on a train platform just a few months before. "You're coming home with me." May 1876 arrived with perfect weather for a wedding, clear blue skies, mild temperatures, and wildflowers blooming across the meadows surrounding Silver Creek. The months since New Year's had passed quickly, filled with teaching, wedding preparations, and weekend visits to the ranch where Penelope would soon make her permanent home. On the morning of her wedding day, Penelope woke in her schoolhouse quarters for the last time. Tomorrow, a new teacher would arrive to finish the school term while she and Wyatt traveled to Denver for a brief honeymoon. The transition had been carefully planned, with Penelope ensuring her replacement was fully prepared to continue her student's education in her absence. A knock at her door revealed Mrs. Fletcher and several other women from town, come to help the bride prepare for her big day. They brought flowers, ribbons, and enthusiastic assistance, as Penelope bathed and dressed in the new gown that had arrived from Denver just a week earlier, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "You look beautiful, my dear, Mrs. Fletcher said as she arranged Penelope's hair, weaving wildflowers into the dark curls. "Wyatt won't know what hit him," Penelope smiled, thinking of her soon-to-be husband. Over the past months, their love had deepened from the initial attraction to something solid and enduring. They had weathered their first disagreements, discovered each other's flaws and quirks, and emerged stronger for the knowledge. She loved him not with the idealized devotion she had once felt for Samuel, but with a clear-eyed, wholehearted commitment that recognized Wyatt as he truly was good and honorable, occasionally stubborn, unfailingly kind, and absolutely essential to her happiness. Another knock at the door announced the arrival of special guests, Penelope's parents and sister, who had traveled from Boston for the wedding. The reunion had been emotional when they first arrived 3 days earlier, with many tears and explanations. To Penelope's relief, her parents had taken to Wyatt immediately, recognizing in him the solid character and genuine love for their daughter that was far more valuable than the business prospects Samuel had offered. "Oh, Penny," her mother sighed, using the childhood nickname Penelope had long outgrown. "You look radiant." "Indeed you do," her father agreed, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Your young man is a fortunate fellow." Her younger sister, Patricia, just 16, circled Penelope admiringly. "The dress is perfect. And your hair, oh, it's like something from a fairy tale." With final adjustments made and the bouquet of wildflowers and roses assembled, it was time to depart for the church. Wyatt had insisted on following tradition by not seeing his bride on their wedding day until she walked down the aisle, so he had spent the night at the ranch while Penelope remained in town. The short journey to the church was made in Mayor Wilson's carriage, decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. As they approached, Penelope could see that the small church was packed to capacity, with some townspeople even standing outside the open doors. "Looks like the whole town turned out," her father observed as he helped her from the carriage. "Your young man is well respected here." "They both are," Mrs. Fletcher corrected gently. "Your daughter has become a treasured member of our community, Mr. Hayes." Inside the church, the guests rose as Penelope appeared at the doorway on her father's arm. But Penelope had eyes only for Wyatt, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face transformed with joy as he caught sight of her. The walk down the aisle seemed both eternal and instantaneous. And then she was there, her father placing her hand in Wyatt's, the warmth of his fingers closing around hers, grounding her in the moment. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his eyes never leaving hers. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. They had written their own vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through all the seasons of their lives together. When Wyatt slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, but his voice betrayed his emotion. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, the words both traditional and deeply personal. And then the pastor was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Wyatt was kissing her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face their friends and family as Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt Daniels. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and lively. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by seemingly every household in Silver Creek. Music from local fiddle players and a pianist filled the air, and dancing continued well into the evening. As bride and groom, Penelope and Wyatt were at the center of it all, accepting congratulations, sharing dances, and occasionally stealing moments alone in quiet corners to marvel at the fact that they were finally married. "Happy, Mrs. Daniels?" Wyatt asked during one such moment, his arm around her waist as they watched the dancing from a secluded spot near the windows. "Completely," she replied, leaning into him. "And you, Mr. Daniels, His answer was to tilt her face up for a kiss that left no doubt of his happiness. Later, as the celebration continued, Penelope found herself approached by Violet Madsen, who had been quietly helping serve refreshments throughout the event. "Miss Hayes, I mean, Mrs. Daniels." The younger woman greeted her with a shy smile. "I wanted to wish you joy before you left." "Thank you, Violet," Penelope replied warmly. "And thank you for all your help today." Violet hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "I wanted you to know I'm leaving Silver Creek next week. I've taken a position as a companion to an elderly lady in Denver." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Penelope said, genuinely pleased for the girl who had, against all odds, become something of a friend. "It is," Violet agreed. "A fresh start like you found here." She glanced across the room to where Wyatt was deep in conversation with Penelope's father. "He's a good man. You deserve each other." Before Penelope could respond, Violet had slipped away, back to her duties at the refreshment table. Watching her go, Penelope felt a sense of completion, as if the final chapter of the Samuel Taylor story had been closed for both of them. As the evening progressed, traditions were observed: the cutting of the cake, the tossing of the bouquet, caught by a blushing young woman who worked at the general store, and finally, the departure of the bride and groom amid a shower of rice and well wishes. Wyatt had arranged for a carriage to take them not to the hotel in town as many expected, but directly to the ranch, which had been prepared for their first night as husband and wife. Mrs. Rivera had discreetly absented herself to stay with relatives in town, leaving the newlyweds complete privacy. The drive to the ranch was quiet, both of them content to sit close together under the stars, hands linked, hearts full. When they arrived, Wyatt surprised Penelope by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Daniels," he said as he set her down in the entrance hall, now truly her home. The main room had been transformed with candles and flowers, a fire crackling welcomingly in the fireplace despite the mild spring evening. On the table, a bottle of champagne waited in an ice bucket, 2 glasses beside it. "It's perfect," Penelope breathed, taking in the romantic scene. Wyatt moved to pour the champagne, handing her a glass before raising his own. "To my wife," he said simply. "The best thing that ever happened to me." Penelope touched her glass to his. "And to my husband, the man who rescued me when I needed it most and then gave me the greatest gift of all, his heart." They drank, eyes locked over the rims of their glasses. Then Wyatt took her glass and set it aside with his own. "I love you, Penelope Daniels," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "More than I have words to express." "Then show me," she whispered, stepping into his embrace. His kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate as she responded eagerly. With reverent hands, he began to remove the pins from her hair, letting the dark curls fall around her shoulders. Penelope's own hands moved to his jacket, slipping it from his shoulders as their kiss deepened. Slowly, they made their way upstairs to what was now their shared bedroom, pausing often for kisses and caresses. The room, like the rest of the house, had been prepared for their wedding night: fresh linens on the bed, more candles casting a warm glow, a vase of wildflowers on the dresser. With infinite care, Wyatt helped Penelope out of her wedding dress, his touch both reverent and thrilling as it skimmed over her skin. She in turn unbuttoned his shirt, her fingers trembling slightly with anticipation and new bride's nerves. "You're shaking," he observed softly, catching her hands in his. "I'm a little nervous," she admitted. "I've never." He kissed her gently. "I know we have all night, all our lives. There's no rush." His tenderness eased her anxiety. This was Wyatt, her husband, the man she trusted above all others. With that knowledge giving her confidence, she reached for him again, this time without hesitation. What followed was a discovery of each other that transcended the physical joining of their bodies. In Wyatt's arms, Penelope found a passion she had never imagined possible, matched by a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Their lovemaking was both an expression of the love they had built over months and a promise of the deeper connection they would forge in the years to come. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness, Wyatt's arms strong around her, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From abandoned bride to beloved wife, from lost and alone to found and cherished, it had been a transformation as dramatic as it was unexpected. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear where her head rested on his chest. "I'm thinking about fate," she replied, tracing patterns on his skin with her fingertips. "How the worst moment of my life led me to the best." He tightened his arms around her. "I've thought about that too. If Taylor hadn't been a faithless fool, you'd be his wife now, not mine." "I can't imagine that life anymore," she confessed. "It seems like a dream I once had, insubstantial compared to this reality." Wyatt shifted to look into her eyes, his expression serious in the dim light. "I promise you, Penelope, that I will spend every day of our life together making sure you never regret choosing this reality." She touched his face tenderly. "I already know I won't. You are everything I never knew I needed, Wyatt Daniels." His answering kiss sealed the promise between them, a promise of love, of partnership, of a shared future built on the solid foundation they had laid in the months since their fateful meeting at Silver Creek Station. 5 years later, Penelope stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Wyatt taught their 3-year-old son, William, to sit on his first pony. The child's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the sounds of spring birds calling, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft gurgle of the creek that gave their town its name. Inside the house, their infant daughter, Pearl, slept peacefully in her cradle, watched over by Mrs. Rivera, who had remained with them through the growth of their family. The ranch itself had prospered under Wyatt's careful management, expanding to include new pastures and improved breeding stock. They had built a larger house 2 years earlier, with plenty of room for their growing family and frequent visitors from town and back east. Penelope had continued teaching until William's birth, then reluctantly gave up her position at the school to focus on her family. But she hadn't abandoned education entirely. She now hosted a weekly reading circle for neighboring ranch wives and occasionally tutored children who lived too far from town to attend school regularly. Silver Creek had grown as well, with a new church, a proper doctor's office for Dr. Fletcher, and even a small library that Penelope had helped establish. The railroad had finally reached them the previous year, making travel to Denver and beyond much easier. Penelope's parents had visited twice, growing increasingly fond of their Western grandchildren and the life their daughter had built so far from Boston. As Wyatt lifted William from the pony and set him on his shoulders for the walk back to the house, Penelope's heart swelled with the fullness of her happiness. The abandoned bride who had stood weeping at Silver Creek Station was now a cherished wife, a devoted mother, and a respected member of the community. Wyatt looked up, catching sight of her on the porch. His smile, still capable of making her heart skip after all these years, spread across his face as he quickened his pace. "Mama," William called, waving frantically from his perch on his father's shoulders. "I rode all by myself." "I saw, darling," she called back. "You were very brave." Wyatt set the boy down at the foot of the porch steps. "Go wash up for lunch, partner. Tell Mrs. Rivera we'll be in shortly." As William scampered inside, Wyatt climbed the steps to join Penelope. though his hair now showed a few strands of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of working outdoors. He was still the handsome, steadfast man who had claimed her heart that long ago autumn. "How's Pearl?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Sleeping peacefully. She'll be hungry soon, though." Penelope leaned into him, savoring the familiar warmth of his body against hers. "William did well with the pony." "He's a natural, just like his mother," Wyatt replied, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "Remember how nervous you were the first time I put you on Thunderbolt?" Penelope laughed at the memory. "I was terrified. A city girl who'd never been closer to a horse than a carriage ride in the park. And now you ride as well as any woman in the territory," he said with evident pride. "Better than most men, if truth be told." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the land that had become their shared legacy. Then Wyatt turned to her, his expression growing serious. "Are you happy, Penelope, with this life we've built?" She looked up at him, surprised by the question after all this time. "Completely happy," she assured him. "More than I ever dreamed possible. Why do you ask?" He shrugged slightly. "The letter from your sister yesterday, she mentioned that your old friend Elizabeth Thorndyke is now married to a senator, living in Washington society. I wondered if you ever regret not having that kind of life." Penelope reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the beloved features she knew as well as her own. "Wyatt Daniels, the day you rode up to that train station and said you're coming home with me was the luckiest day of my life. I have never, not for one moment, regretted following you home." The worry in his eyes dissolved, replaced by the deep love that had sustained them through good times and hard ones. "I'm the lucky one," he said softly. "Every morning I wake up amazed that you chose this life." "And I would choose it again," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "1,000 times over I would choose you." Inside the house, the baby's cry announced that Pearl was awake and hungry. William's voice called for his parents to come see the tower of blocks he'd built. Their life together was calling. Hand in hand, Wyatt and Penelope Daniels went inside to answer that call, leaving behind the ghosts of who they had once been, the abandoned bride, the solitary rancher, and stepping fully into the joy of who they had become together. A family, bound by love that had begun with 7 simple words spoken on a train platform and had grown into a lifetime of happiness.